I wrote a 60-second piece in the style of a magical Disney parade, but I kept it limited to simply a piano sketch. I then sent that sketch over to my friend Christopher C.U., a talented composer and fellow YouTuber who shares my love for that cinematic orchestral sound. Chris took that piano sketch and orchestrated it for a full orchestra, and then we hopped on a call to discuss how he approached working from someone else's sketch, how he captured that Disney orchestral sound, how he decided when to use my ideas and when to follow his intuition and add his own ideas, and his thoughts on orchestrating for virtual instruments in the era of digital composers. Before we get into our conversation, let's take a listen to that original piano sketch. So I'm curious, when I sent you this sketch, it said, here, orchestrate this. What was step one?
Yeah, so step one, I basically brought the sketch into Logic. I decided what melodic instrumentation I wanted first. And that probably took the longest because I didn't want to use brass the entire time, right? Given it's a heroic thing or whatever. And I knew I wanted French horns, I knew I wanted trumpets and the higher registers, but in the middle, we also know that strings are really good at performing these sorts of themes that are more up-tempo and exciting. So I decided like which instruments I wanted to play the melody, and then that kind of informed the harmonic and rhythmic decisions for the rest of the orchestra. So it's always the melody first, melodic instrumentation, figure that out, and then figure out what complements that melodic instrumentation fittingly, and then move on to the rest of the details, like the textures, the runs, and all of that.
So you orchestrated this based on my sketch, which was limited information. But those runs, when I heard them, I almost thought that they were in my sketch because they make so much sense. They seem
Right.
like just the obvious thing. Do you have any thoughts on how you just knew to do that without me telling you to?
That's a good question. I think it started off with trying to decide how faithful I was to your sketch versus how much I wanted to add on my own, right? And I believe that we put all of the information from your sketch into the final product because I wanted to use that as a foundational base, right? And I actually think it's a positive that you didn't put everything in because then we can kind of exercise our personal experiences, like how we want to orchestrate certain things, right?
Were there any ways that you knew, oh, this is a moment where we need more than what's on the page?
To kind of figure out what holes are currently there. It could be harmonic holes, it could be melodic holes, or maybe it just feels like something that like there's just a gap in the music, right? And so those moments you want to just close your eyes, listen back, and this is literally what I do every single second. So I'm listening to a passage, but then I ask myself, could this be even more interesting, right? So I find myself starting to put melodies and additional textures when maybe the melody's holding a certain note and the harmonic instruments maybe are more sustained, but there's not much rhythmic activity going on there. So maybe that requires some rhythmical aspects. Maybe it's a little snare drum. Maybe it's, I don't know, a timpani or something. Maybe the melody is holding something, but the rhythmic section is super active, but it sounds like there's not much harmonic material going on in the mid-range. So maybe that's cause for a more pad stuff in the middle. Maybe that means there should be a counter melody in there to enhance what's already happening in the melody. I think a good rule of thumb is whenever you have a sort of gap in harmonic information or rhythmic information, use that opportunity to put in something that complements what's happening in the main theme.
The working title for this on the sketch was Magical Fanfare. So as an orchestrator, are there certain colors, especially in this kind of Disney context that we were going for, what are the colors that say Disney Magical Fanfare?
I feel like the Disney style uses quite a lot of strings and woodwinds and whatever they do if it's a typical orchestral score and not just brass, because a lot of trailer pieces type of that style doesn't really focus too much on the woodwind section. I literally have a student who refuses to touch woodwinds. Giving a nice balance to the entire orchestra, giving each section a chance to shine, like give it its own function where it can very clearly, you can define what it's doing. I think that is something that Disney excels at with their orchestrators, because they appreciate the entire orchestra and they try to use, like we said, each section very deliberately and in certain ways.
Do you have any thoughts on how to develop a vocabulary and kind of know who gets the chords, who gets the melody, and what just makes sense?
Honestly, I think listening, you can treat it as like 80% of your learning process. Just listening and then writing down what you hear, what you enjoy about it. Like, oh, it feels like maybe the violas were doubled with the violins, they're an octave apart, and what effect did that create? It strengthened the melody. Or the brass are playing this really short ostinato. Are there other brass in there? Like, is it trombones as well? But yeah, listening is so important. And then score study as well, right? Like, take a look at what has actually happened in a published material. So if you have the score on hand, then you can always refer to it just to double check if you're correct, And even if you can't read notation, that's totally fine. Like, you can get a general sense of who's playing where because notes are obvious.
See where the black dots are.
You see where the black dots are, yes. Yeah. So I would do that for maybe 20-30% of the time. But at least for me personally, I think listening was the number one thing, because you just develop the inner ear of understanding how the orchestra sounds and what things can do what.
You have a lot of libraries. I know you have a pretty good collection. Was there any consideration at any point, any limits of what you maybe weren't able to do? Or kind of on the reverse, knowing your libraries, was there any choices that you're like, oh, I want to use this because it will sound really great with XYZ samples?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, the most direct example I can think of is for the very beginning brass lick, actually, because not a lot of brass libraries have really good punchy staccatissimos, right? And because it's a quicker tempo, the overall piece, da-ka-da, like there's you got to make that sound convincing. I was using Cinebrass at first because I really wanted that Sony tone in the samples, but I realized like the short staccatissimo weren't actually short enough, so I actually had to turn to Cinematic Studio Brass to do that function, and I used the shortest short note. It was like, I think they call it the repetition short. I basically used the short patch there to go da-ka-da, but then I used Cinebrass to hold that note. So ba-ba for Cinematic Studio Brass, and then da for Cinebrass, right? And then I tried to mix it in a way where it sounded somewhat cohesive, and you can't really tell the difference between those two libraries.
So you're not worried about keeping one trumpet sound the whole time. You use what sounds good for the moment?
I use what sounds good for the moment, but of course you still want to keep in consideration if it's going to sound convincing as that same player throughout the entire time. So maybe that means it's a similar dynamic, or you have to choose similar mic positions, right? Or do similar EQ moves or something to make it sound that way.
When we're working on film and video game music where the ensemble is virtual, can we separate the orchestration process from the sample libraries? Or do we need to really be conscious of both?
Yeah, I guess it really depends on the end goal, right? Like if you know that it's going to be entirely virtual, then the sample library selection is a lot more important. One of the giveaways of an amateur mockup is just having the instruments not feel like they're in the same location. So one of those things is just figuring out which microphone positions are consistent between your different sections. So you might want to find like a mixed mic position you like from one library. Let's say your strings library has a mixed position that sounds great, but the woodwinds sound too close. So you might have to blend the close with more of the tree or the omni mic and compare those back and forth and just close your eyes and say like, do these instruments feel like they could be in the same room? And if the answer is yes, then you can move on and so forth. That skill becomes trivial when you listen to lots and lots of recordings. And I always think it starts from a good understanding of how those timbres work, how the dynamic ranges are, playable ranges, etc. And then figuring out what sample libraries can actually do that and go from there.
So now let's listen to Chris's final orchestration and mock-up of the full Disney fanfare piece. Chris and I also talked about how I approached the original composition of that piano sketch, and how I used motives and form and harmony to capture that Disney fanfare as the foundation of the piece. To learn about how I approached the composition side of that track, you definitely want to check out this video on Chris's channel here. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.